Okay, so this is about the expedition to Antarctica, 2021, 2022, from December 2021 to January 2022. Uh, More specifically for the science team here, Ian, Johan and myself. We were also supported by Annika, who was our field support, and then the 4 other crew members from Polar, who were there to help us take care of the station, build a garage, amongst other things, and just and generally make sure that things work, which they did, despite the weather. So this is us standing in a line, as you can see. I think that's particularly difficult to see. And in the background, there is a Nunatak. This is Plogen in the background, and we're standing on the Nordenskjöldbasen, Nunatak, which is where Vasa, the Swedish station, is. And we're just outside of the station there. The weather is fairly standard weather on that day, and you can see it's quite low cloud, but still nice enough. So where is this? This is a very simple map, and we have Vasa marked out. This is a little bit farther north, closer to the coast. The main station, and then farther inland there's a much smaller station called Svea. We had intended to go there, but we never actually managed to get there due to various problems. The Swedish station Vasa is next to the Finnish station. Basically, we're neighbours with the Finnish station, Aboa, and they were there at the same time as us. Very nice, and they were very friendly and helpful. We shared a doctor because our doctor got stuck in Cape Town on the way down, stuck with the second crew that ended up. One of their second crew members contracted COVID right at the end of their quarantine period of 2 weeks, and so they had to stay for another 2 weeks. And by then there were no flights down, and the whole of Antarctica had gone into quarantine because COVID had managed to get in. But in the end, they had to return home without setting foot on Antarctica. So our doctor didn't make it down in the second team, so we shared a doctor with the Finnish station. This is the distribution of stations in Dronningmordland. As you can see, we've got the Vasa Aboa set up over there on the to the west. We've got the German station towards the north, Neumayer, and then perhaps the next most important thing to note is over there on the east we have the Novo station, which is where we're going to land. We flew in from Cape Town, land at Novo runway, which is an airport, essentially, an airstrip run by Russia, basically run by the Russians along with Argentinians and South Africans. And we flew down there with this aeroplane, an Ilyushin. These are Indian researchers who were on the same flight as us. It's a Russian aeroplane, as you can see. And yes, all of this took place just before Russia decided to invade the Ukraine. Luckily, everybody from the Swedish crew, at least, were out just before that happened. I'm not sure there would have been a problem afterwards either. But so there we flew down in this aeroplane, which looks like that on the inside. It's fairly basic, fairly simple stuff. You're on benches along the sides of the aircraft with all the equipment stacked up in front of you. So it's not comfortable, but then it's not supposed to be a luxury flight. And then when you get to Novo, it looks like this: a series of containers in which you can live, and there's a small mess hall just off the image to the right here, where you'll serve food, good food. The chef was very nice, did a good job. You certainly didn't go hungry in the few days we had to wait at Novo, ready for departure to our station. So flying on from Novo 2-hour station, you fly via Neumeier. In a DC-3, you fly to Neumeier, then refuel there, and then fly on to a Bowen. So the DC-3 flying onto Neumeier is this aircraft. It's DC-3 built in 1944. It's already crashed once on Antarctica and had to be rebuilt in place. Lydia. So you can see that on the right there, and then there's Neumeier in the background, which looks like a giant ferry that's run aground. Huge station, but we didn't set foot in that, partly because there really wasn't time, but also because of the COVID restrictions. And the big blue thing there on the left is the fuel tank, supplying the fuel to refuel the aircraft. So then we fly on from Neumeier to our station there at Vasa. And when we get there, it looks like this. We landed down in that big white thing beyond what you can, beyond the station there. As you can see, the station is a collection of small buildings and containers, plus a few masts. And we actually see some outer buildings from the Finnish station over towards the left there. If we look over here, it's the Finnish station. This is the Swedish station. It can also look like this when the weather isn't that nice. This is perhaps not a typical day as such, but a not unusual day with some fairly grotty weather. Not the worst weather that we experienced though. So what were we doing there? Well, the project was looking at the effects of snow on radar signals and LiDAR signals. Partly looking at surface roughness. So if you can imagine a signal coming in, and depending on the wavelength of the signal and the wavelength of the roughness, you either get backscattering or reflection, essentially. And what we want is backscattering, because if we get reflection, the signal bounces off somewhere else and doesn't go back to the satellite. Whereas if we get backscattering, we can measure it from the satellite. So measuring roughness to see what typical effects you have from that. We're also measuring the penetration of the radar signal. The scattering applied to both the radar and the LiDAR, whereas we're also measuring snow density and changes in the snow if we could find variations in the snow due to melt events, if there were ice lenses and so on and so forth, to see how the radar signal penetrates into the snow before being reflected back. This is a problem we have with snow in that we're trying to measure the elevation of the surface, but obviously if the signal penetrates into the thing it's measuring, then the reflection is not coming from the actual surface, but from some point lower down. What that point is something one of our team is modeling, or just exactly how the signal interacts with the snow. And just maybe to explain some of these terms here, the snow surface, and then we have firn here, which is, in terms of glaciology, is what we call snow after it's compacted beyond a certain point. It's not yet ice. Generally speaking, in the warmer climes of, say, Sweden, it will become firn already after 1 year. Whereas in terms of Antarctica, where you tend not to get as much melt even in the summer, it can take much longer for the snow to compact down to a high enough density to be called firn, and then further compaction sends it onto ice. So we were measuring the snow. We didn't drill very deeply. We measured the snow to try and find ice lenses, as I said, and measure the density of the snow to see, so that we can then model, or one of our team members can model how the snow might affect the reflection of the signal, of the radar signal. And we were doing this also in certain locations where we know the satellites that we're interested in make measurements and make more than one measurement. They have these so-called crossover points, so we can compare data from different look angles and from different satellites at the same time. And another part of the project was also to set out radar reflectors, these devices that I'll show you in a minute, that should hopefully reflect strongly and reasonably cleanly the signal back to the satellite, so that we can compare that with the signal from the surrounding snow, so that we have a good reflector at a known height and can compare that with the signal we're getting otherwise from the surroundings. So there were some of these have already been placed out, and others we were putting out anew. So that's the basic idea of the research that we were doing there. Measuring surface roughness, measuring the snow density to see how it affects or to model its effect on reflected radar signals, and to place out and replace radar reflectors. So 2 of those new to place out, 3 old ones. The idea was at least to find the 3 old ones, dig them out and relocate them. Roughness surveys using leveling and a new laser ranging technique developed by one of our team members, your one, and then our density measurements using a drill and some snow pits as well. So we'll look at what we did in the field now with some nice pictures. So this is a radar reflector. This is one of the new ones that we put out. Quite short legs. You can see here, these are the legs. They've been dug down maybe a couple of decimeters, and they have broad feet. And you could wonder, well, how well does that sit in the snow? Will they not get blown away? This was the first one we placed out. The first day, or after a couple of days of being at the station, you begin with safety instructions and having to go through sort of getting the station in order, and then you can finally get out into the field. So we got this one out, and then we were hit by a storm, a 10-day storm, more of that later, very strong storm. And when we came back to this radar reflector some days after the storm, it was still there in place, hardly a scratch on it. So actually they are quite robust, and they do stand quite well. So that was good news. So that's a radar reflector. It's approximately 1 meter across. The exact dimensions I can't remember. Ian knows more about that. I'm just there to dig. And then digging out an old radar reflector. So on top here there was a similar construction to what we've just seen, with these long legs, and these are really quite long, having to dig out. This is the only one we found. There were 3 placed out a couple of years ago, and only one of them we could find. The other 2 are just buried by the snow. Maybe we can find them at some point in the future, probably not. So these side legs were about 2.5 meters long, and then this central leg going down was way too deep. And we dug and we dug. I dug. That's my speciality. You can see that's me by the ball patch. Dug and I dug and I dug, and then after sort of hours of digging and lots of sweat, we realised that there isn't a foot on the bottom. It's just a pole that's been drilled down using the Pico drill. So if we just twist the whole construction enough, we could probably pull it out, which is what we did in the end and managed to get it out. We could have really thought about that one a bit earlier, but there you go. 3 PhDs between us, and it took us 2 hours of digging to figure out that. So then we got it out, and then we put it somewhere else, moved it to another location. And this is the installation of that same radar reflector in a new location. And you can see the actual reflector lying down on the ground behind there. It hasn't been mounted yet. So the legs have been put in, and this is the bracket that holds the reflector, and it's about to be mounted in place. And this is actually the part of the Nordenskjöldbasen and Nunatak behind. So we're not far from the research station here. The roughness work, measuring surface roughness. How do we do that? Roughness work, what are we talking about? Well, this is surface roughness. This is a nice picture. I think this is actually one of Ian's pictures. We can see this variation in the surface. All of this is of interest, but of course it's snow. We get things like this, roughness on different scales. It varies in different places, and will obviously affect how the radar signals and LiDAR signals are reflected back to the sensor. So what do? Well, you measure it. And here's me kneeling on the snow, using a manual level, to measure snow elevation, relative at least, the relative elevation, so we're getting the surface roughness. And that we do using a very simple method of holding a rule on the snow. Why aren't we using more advanced equipment? More advanced equipment tends to be heavier, and this is snow, and we want to measure the surface. So we need light equipment, something that isn't going to sink into the snow and destroy the thing we're measuring. So we are just walking across the snow methodically, measuring the elevation changes, slight height changes, to get a measure of the surface roughness. Alternatively, we can use lasers. And this grey plastic tube may look like a bit of sewage pipe, but it's actually some lasers. Well, there are lasers in that sewage pipe, connected to some highly technical computers here. They're not highly technical, it's just connected to some computers, and then being pulled along on a sled behind a snow scooter. So this is actually a method of measuring a long traverse very rapidly. Of course, this is a new technique, and we need to be truthing the measurements, which is why we were using the level instrument to check the data against that. So we were confirming that this instrument works, this laser instrument works, so that we're using our surveys as well. So we were informing each other, because now that we know that this works, we can use the traverses created using this instrument, rather than having to rely solely on manually measuring surface roughness everywhere. So for density cores, drilling into the snow, which is probably the biggest job we had. This is what most of our work was while we were there. That was quite physical labour. Everything's fairly physical. A little bit about this photograph. It wasn't unusual for the weather to be like this, where we had reasonably low cloud, removing all shadows, so that you just cannot see what's in front of you. I mean, you can see if there's something there, but when everything is white with no shadow, whether there's no distinct sunlight coming in from one direction or another, there are no shadows, and you are surprised by every bump in the ground or in the snow surface. It's very slow going. Eerie, beautiful, but can be quite hard work. And so what we do is we have something called a pico drill, which picks up meter-long samples, approximately slightly less than a meter-long samples each time. And so to get out the snow, you have to drill down, pull up the first meter, drill down again, pull up the second meter, drill down again, pull up the third meter, and you end up pulling these longer and longer drills out just to get at the core each time. So as you can see here, Ian is walking away with this core. This is where the core is taken, and so we have to keep extending this rod, as it were, bit by bit, to get deeper and deeper down into our snowpack. And then we analyze each part as it comes up, checking for obvious ice layers, crystal size, a quick check of that, and density, measuring the density, hacking the core up into bits, and measuring the dimensions and the weight, and recording that in a book. That was what we did a lot of. So we did quite a few of these points. It doesn't look like much, perhaps, but given how many days of actual work we managed to get in, and all the travel time, the difficulty of traveling, and the difficulty of doing the coring, it felt like a reasonable amount of work. So how did we do this? What was it like being out in the field? The living conditions. Well, on longer tours, we were supposed to be living in a larger, almost caravan-like thing. Unfortunately, I mentioned earlier there was a bit of a storm, and we'll come back to what that did. I also mentioned that there was supposed to be a second team coming down that didn't come down, which was also quite fortunate for us, because it meant that we got to use these things, these blue arcs, as they're called. So we could live in these overnight in those when we're out on longer tours. So here we were, Ian and I were out drilling cores, whilst Annika and Yuan put up this weather station. And this was our base camp. That's the toilet tent there. The toilet requires a lot of room. Everything has to be returned, has to leave Antarctica, gets flown back to South Africa. What the South Africans do with it after that is another question. But everything gets returned, so that toilet tent isn't just over a hole in the ground. There's a bucket in there that has to be shipped out. So that's what it's like. That's the inside of one of these arcs, and you've got a stove at the back here that burns fuel, Jet A1, which, yeah, when it burns properly, it's fine. When it doesn't, my God, it stinks. That's the living conditions. You can't quite sit up straight when sitting on the bed there. That's the level of discomfort, but it's actually quite okay living in these things. It's not, it's not a luxury hotel, but it's okay. It's doable. I've slept in worse conditions. But back to this thing with the storm. Why were we living in these arcs? Where was our caravan? And what was this storm that tested our radar reflector? Well, it looked something like this. Yeah. And what that did, because that wasn't actually the windiest day, that was just enough to put you off going outside quite effectively. But a couple of times it blew so hard that one time it actually managed to turn over. This was the thing that we were supposed to be living in on the longer tours. So you can see that it was quite a storm, and there were some questions after this about, because battery acid had leaked and the gas line for the kitchen was potentially ruptured, and so it was just deemed less safe to be using these when we have the alternative accommodation of the smaller arcs to live in. So we didn't bother going out in this, and we took the smaller things instead, which is a shame because this would have been luxury living. But instead, when we weren't in the arcs, what was the station like? It was like this, really quite pleasant. This is the main living area, the kitchen and living room. Picture of the Swedish king and queen there. And we even had a little bit of fruit. That was nice. So this is basically what we got to live in. And it could look like this. It was. This is a film from Christmas Eve, the traditional day of celebrating Christmas in Sweden. This is just after the storm. We begin with just a short bit about the water leaking in through the roof as the snow that got blown in under the roof then started to melt. So we can see it dripping down here. Drip, drip. That in the end stopped. And this is what it looks like inside the station. It's quite nice. Every team puts up one of these wooden plaques at the end of their expedition to sort of mark that they've been there and what they did. And this is celebrating the traditional Swedish Christmas. As you can see, it's all pretty familiar stuff. Otherwise, life. What's life like? This is a trace of life. There's not much there, but there are birds, some birds, and this is bird poo everywhere. There are snow petrels that nest in this area. It's quite a long way from the coast, and there is nothing else there. Literally nothing else. Not an insect, no lichen, no moss, no lichen, nothing. I saw absolutely nothing except for these petrels, the snow petrels. And of course, because there's nothing else there, and it's quite dry conditions, their poo builds up over the years. So this is a big cliff, and that's a lot of poo, but it's just built up over time, and that's difficult to see. But that is a snow petrel there, flying over the Nordenskjöldbasen Nunatak. And then our day off. this is New Year's Day, where perhaps we decided it wasn't an idea to go out to the field working. We just wander around our Nunatak, and I managed to capture a nice picture of Dick Johansson standing there looking out over the abyss. But we also got to do a little bit of touristy stuff on I think our first or second day arriving at Vasa, just before the storm hit. The more experienced crew that had been there before, after we'd been out in the field for a day, they came and picked us up and took us for a bit of a nice break, cup of coffee and a cake in this rather magical environment, which is a wind scoop on the far side of the other side of the Nordenskjöldbasen to where the station is. So all this has been scooped away. The snow has been taken away by the wind, erodes it away, and we're left with this exposed ice, this blue ice area here, which is also quite convenient because this is where we could fetch water from. It would actually warm up enough from the rock, and then because we had exposed ice, we could get meltwater building up there, and enough of it, in fact, to supply both the Finns and us with water, as long as there was meltwater and we could access it, which we couldn't do during the storm. Looking back at Nordenskjöld, so that's our Nunatak over there. That's where our station is, and this picture is taken from this other one that I spoke about on the very first slide, Plogen. We went there to just check it out, do some measurements, and help and brush the snow off of the solar panel of the radio mast there. So this is another view of Plogen from below, and we can see this build-up of snow on the top there. We haven't analysed that snow on top of the rock here, but looking at it, Ian and I both came to the conclusion that it probably wasn't actually snow and ice that had been pushed up by the movement of the ice sheet, but rather this is locally accumulated snow and ice. It seems to be there doesn't seem to be much actual ice in it, but rather just snow and fern. Just some more pretty pictures, really, of rocks in snow. This is again Plogen, and this is the radio mast on top of Plogen that we went to check out and brush the snow off of the solar panel, which you can't actually see because it's covered in snow at the moment. And then just some more pictures. This is taken from Fossilryggen, which is another Nunatak further inland, going towards the Svea station. And we can see also another one of these wind scoop effects here on this rock sticking up here. And in the distance we can see some more Nunatak mountains here with this local cloud building up here above it. And this is again Nordenskjöldbasen here, and Krokodilen, the crocodile, down here, sticks up a few meters, maybe 10-20 meters above the snow, in this long string, which supposedly looks like a crocodile. And then a view out towards Plogen again with this cloud formation in the general cloudy image, with this local cloud picking up on the orographic cloud there over the Nunatak. Looking out, or looking in towards the South Pole, somewhere a few 100 kilometers, over 1,000, nearly 2,000 kilometers from there inwards is the South Pole, somewhere in there.